The Blood Angels stand out as one of the most active chapters of Space Marines since their inception as a legion under their Primarch Sanguinius. Reaching out to the many corners of the galaxy with flame and chainsword, the Blood Angels have a noble stature that mirrors that of their fallen liege. With that noble stature comes a dark set of secrets. Secrets that not only characterize the chapter, but also might spell its ultimate demise as they degenerate more and more as time has gone on. The two curses, the Black Rage and the Red Thirst, have been a part of the Blood Angels for a long time, the Red Thirst being discovered far before the Horus Heresy and the Black Rage appearing after the fall of Sanguinius. In this video today, I want to go into what makes these two flaws distinct, but also what the results of succumbing to them are. We know full well the might of the Black Rage and the crushing power of the Death Company, but what is more iconic than a sea of red Blood Angels with a contingent of Death Company clad in all black, raging at the visions in their mind? The Red Thirst, on the other hand, has a much different effect than you would think. On the surface, it creates the illusion of space vampires, as the Blood Angels are sometimes jokingly referred to in the lore. Well, not in the lore, but outside of the lore, by us. We refer to them as that. But it's so much more than that. So join me now, battle brother, as we peer into the flaws of the Angel. Black Rage is a more recent flaw of the Blood Angel's gene seed. It only came about after the death of Sanguinius at the hands of Horus. As the story goes, when the Emperor and his sons teleported aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the flagship of Horus, the boarding parties were scattered across the ship as chaos wreaked havoc on the teleportation process. After all, it's essentially stepping into a temporary warp gate from one location to the next. Rogel Dorn and the Emperor were isolated from one another, but Sanguinius was cast astray far beyond his father, brother, and sons. As an innately psychic Primarch, Sanguinius dealt with all the many horrors of the Vengeful Spirit, like a bad Molly trip where I swear to God Sanguinius was laced with ketamine. The Great Angel eventually made his way to the bridge and dueled his fallen brother, Horus. In the titanic duel, Sanguinius fell, rending a small hole in Horus's armor. This rend eventually allowed the Emperor to defeat Horus, but the cost of the Blood Angels was great. There are two ways this has gone in the lore. One is that the death of Sanguinius caused such a huge psychic backlash to every single Blood Angel in the Sol system that it imprinted itself deeply into the genetic code of the gene seed itself. Since the Blood Angels' gene seeds were so depleted, they had to create more from the remaining ones, thus ensuring that every new gene seed would have the Black Rage built into it. The second iteration to this is simply that after Sanguinius' death, the Blood Angels needed to replenish their gene seeds, lost during the Siege of Terra, as we well know, and the resulting new gene seed samples came from Sanguinius' body, which had the psychic memory of his death imprinted upon it. I prefer the first version, or at least an amalgamation of the two, like maybe, okay, they used Sanguinius' body, but there was already the imprint across the way, I'm not really sure, but when we read the Horus Heresy book, Fear to Tread, we see the psychic effects of their Primarch simply being wounded on the Blood Angels. I mean, his death would have been catastrophic as far as a psychic imprint upon the Legion. But what does this mean for the Blood Angels? How does this spell itself out across the grand legacy that is the last 10 millennia since the fall of Sanguinius? Black Rage is born from this very instance, and with it the rise of the Death Company. On the eve of battle, as the humors of a Blood Angel are tossed into disarray with the coming storm of conflict, a Blood Angel can fully succumb to the Black Rage. In that moment, the Blood Angel loses their identity and believes that they are Sanguinius, making that lonely trip to the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit and fighting that final battle against Horus himself. Shepherded by the chaplains of the chapter, they repaint their armor in the pitch black of the Death Company, with red markings signifying the wounds of Sanguinius. This terrifying moment makes for a supernatural warrior that no longer feels pain, has increased strength and endurance above that of even an Astartes. With reckless abandon, they throw themselves into the fray, howling as Sanguinius did, proclaiming Horus a traitor as they bring righteous vindication to all on their path. Much in the same way people would charge a doorbuster sale during, Black Friday. But the end result is a Space Marine who is completely lost to these visions. There is no coming back from the Black Rage. Well, minus a few instances which we'll talk about in a bit, but Once you are overcome, you're in the Death Company until you die, or Astaroth the Grim gives you the Angel's Peace. And it's a pretty interesting ritual. Astaroth the Grim arrives, typically without being told of the Black Rage having visited a company, ready to dispatch the victims that have succumbed to their visions. Astaroth can sense the flaw taking shape before it even manifests itself fully in a victim. I don't know, like palm reading or something like that. But more often than not, Astaroth has to fight the victim in single combat, as any enemy is seen to be Horus to those afflicted. After Astaroth uses his Executioner's Axe to cut off their head, granting them soulless. Now, in an instance wherein a Marine has succumbed to the Black Rage, did not die in battle, and Astaroth didn't fly back on his black wings to lop their head off like the Blood Angel's personal Headless Horsemen, then they are ferried to the Tower of the Lost, or the Tower of Amarero, as it is also known as Ball. Amarero? I'll go with Amarero. This massive bell tower stretches high into the air. Within it are housed all of those lost to the both of the curses of the Blood Angels, waiting to be unleashed upon the world during the proverbial final battle. Now, we'll go into that more during the Red Thirst section, so stay tuned on that, but I did mention that almost no one recovers from the Black Rage, for the exception of 2, or like maybe 3 instances I want to go into. The first being Mephiston, as so many of you probably saw this coming. Mephiston was once a librarian of the Blood Angels, named Calistarius. While fighting during the Second War of Armageddon against the Greenskins, he fell to the Black Rage. Inducted into the Death Company, he, throughout most of the campaign, he fought bravely throughout most of the campaign before a building fell on top of him, crushing him under rubble, but not fully killing him. After a week of being trapped and really kind of roiling with all of these visions in his brain, and again, he thinks he's Sanguinius, so this whole time he's trapped under all this rubble. He uses his sheer force of will to suppress the Black Rage and become something else entirely. Mephiston, Lord of Death, the strongest Psyker in the Blood Angels chapter. But it's worth noting that Mephiston is the only Marine to fully succumb and then fully defeat the Black Rage. He is not the same as he was before, when he was Calistarius of the Librarium, but nonetheless, he is the chief librarian of the Blood Angels and a pivotal force multiplier for the chapter. Another individual is Chaplain Lamardus. Once a simple chaplain, he fell to the Black Rage during the liberation of Hadriac 9. After the fighting was done, Astaroth was ready to deliver the Angel's Peace to the fallen chaplain. Instead, Lamardus railed against it, begging with Astaroth to be allowed to live and deliver the Emperor's justice to the many enemies of the Blood Angels. What was different was that all the physical manifestations of the Black Rage had taken hold, bloodshot eyes and muscles bound tightly and kind of a constant readiness for battle. But Lamardus was lucid and not lost to the visions of Sanguinius. He might still fully succumb in the days to come, but Astaroth has declared Lamardus Guardian of the Lost. He is put in stasis in between major engagements, brought out to exact the Emperor's vengeance he so wishes. The last instance is not really a true instance. In the book Devastation of Baal, Dante begins to succumb to what I'd say is the beginning of the Black Rage, but ultimately perseveres during the final battle, seeing a vision of both Sanguinius and Sanguinor. However you want to headcanon that one is up to you, but it's definitely an interesting moment for the oldest Marine in the Imperium to kind of suffer a lot of very interesting visions, and even, spoiler right now, there's a spoiler alert right here. He even kind of has a conversation with Sanguinius. So that could be some sort of weird Black Rage sidestep, who knows, like the Grey Rage. But as you can see, the Black Rage can take hold of anyone, simple battle brother to the chapter master. In fact, the Tower of Amero is named after chapter master Amero, who himself fell victim to one of the curses. The fourth virtue of the Bloody Catechism is aimed directly at a sort of mantra against the Black Rage. Be not rage, lest rage become all you are. In the older versions of the tabletop, you used to have to roll a dice at the beginning of the battle on a dice roll of, I think it was 6 in the earlier editions. That Marine fell to the Black Rage and had to be replaced with a Death Company model. It was a really fluffy rule that was really cool on paper, but you'd find that some people would lose fights because of the sheer randomness of it crippling important squads or even their leadership. There are even more remarkable individuals that have fallen to the rage, such as, Tycho the Lost, but they deserve really their own exposition because they have a pretty wide sweeping lore. But for now, let's move to the other curse, and one I don't think many people know the lasting effects of. The Red Thirst is what makes the Blood Angels space vampires that they are so often compared to. Occurring far before the Horus Heresy, this is a flaw that even Sanguinius knew about, trying to subdue it as much as possible and keep it from anyone else outside of the chapter. Indeed, at the beginning of the heresy, the only people that knew of the curse were Ascalon, Raldoron, the Master Apothecary, and Horus. Horus, before the fall, had witnessed Sanguinius execute one of his own sons. Confiding in his brother, Sanguinius told Horus of the effects of the Red Thirst and his pursuit to purge it from his legion, as he feared this would, appear as taint and lead to the Emperor expunging another of his beloved sons. Sanguinius referred to it as the Flaw and was determined not to become the third empty plinth where the statues of the Primarch stood in the Imperial Palace. As it came to pass, Sanguinius found no cure, and nor have any of his scions. Sanguinius talks about how the Red Thirst turns his sons from the noble warriors of dignified stature to blood-crazy berserkers howling and thirsting for blood, drinking it from friend, foe, or alien alike. Nothing stops a Blood Angel once the Red Thirst has overcome them. They satiate their thirst with the lives of those they willingly spill. This flaw is deeply rooted into the psyche of the Blood Angels, though. It's not as sudden or subtle as the Black Rage. It's an ever-present danger that lurks beneath the surface. Depending on which chapter you're reading, most of the books talk about this as a constant urge to tear out throats or simply drink blood. If the Space Wolves are the werewolves of the 40k world, taking on traits of the wolf itself, then Blood Angels are the vampires, taking on those vampiric traits as well. Longer eye teeth, pale skin, and a hunger that is often satiated with ritualistic feeding via blood thralls, blood goblets, and the such. These teeth elongate when the Red Thirst's urge greatly increases or when a marine is succumbing to it. While blood is a definite link to the Red Thirst, so is anger, and anger is something that the Great Angel himself had in spades. There are plenty of tales of Sanguinius going from benevolent to wrathful whenever he lost his collar to a given scenario. While rare, it did happen, and this mirrors down to his sons. To succumb to the Red Thirst is to lose yourself completely. Not to the wild visions and dreams of the death of their father, but rather to the never-ending battle promised in limitless bloodletting. Spilling the blood of friend and foe alike, the Red Thirst completely dominates a marine. While this is a curse to the Blood Angels, the Red Thirst is also what gives them their vicious reputation as brutal close combat specialists. Noble warriors giving into their thirst gives birth to wild monsters that will fight with their bare hands if absolutely necessary. I mean, there's accounts of them completely abandoning a defensive position because they just want to go kill something. The Flesh Terrors are really an excellent example of a chapter that walks a fine line between sanity and fully giving into the Red Thirst that hungers at the soul of every Blood Angel. Nasir Ahmet, the very first chapter master of the Flesh Terrors, earned the chapter's namesake as a means of a title when he was a Blood Angel. Nasir Flesh Terror Ahmet was so vicious that he bore this legacy across to his chapter with an equally as infamous reputation for ferocity on the battlefield. Interestingly enough, though, the Red Thirst also seems to visibly renew the Blood Angels. It's kind of like the only way I can voice what I'm trying to say here, but there's some books where after partaking in blood, Blood Angels appear rejuvenated, and this is a prevailing theory behind Commander Dante's extreme age, the flaw acting as a means of prolonging their unnatural lives even further. But I mean, truth be told, there's no real documentation of a Space Marine dying of old age anyway, so I mean, take that as you will. But what happens to those that succumb, right? How does this play itself out amongst this noble cast of warriors? Well, it differs. You can give in to the Red Thirst temporarily with a kind of like a means of a sort of control or just a way to control it in which you give in. Like, it's not in the sense that, okay, the Red Thirst has overtaken me, I am fucking gonna kill everything. It's okay, I'm gonna play with the Red Thirst, I'm gonna give into it a little bit, but I'm gonna kind of keep the reins. Commander Dante does this to some measure, but Chapter Master Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Terrors is known for letting himself dangerously loose with his red thirst, reciting mantras internally to cool his mind in the heat of battle. Here's an excerpt from the Devastation of Baal.
By the blood am I made, by the blood am I armored, by the blood I will endure.
That's honestly probably like my favorite part of the book. There's so many good ones, but the Flesh Terrors get into more and more vicious campaigns, seemingly as a way of atoning or a penitence for their rancorous red thirst. But other chapters give in a bit more freely. The Knights of Blood and excommunicated, you could call them renegade chapters, but they're more excommunicated from the Blood Angels. Successor chapter of Blood Angels have taken to assaulting the innocents to satiate their red thirst, draining entire civilian populations of their blood. This eventually has an effect on the chapter, which we see yet again in Devastation of Baal. Centaur Jewel, the chapter master of the Knights of Blood, removes his helmet before the final fight on one of Baal's moons. Instead of the noble face of a blood angel, it is replaced with something bestial. Protruding cheekbones and a sharp chin decorate a crimson face with pointed teeth and yellow eyes crowned with a bony ridged head. Even Kabanda, the Angel's Bane, remarks how similar Centaur Jewel looks like one of his own kind. There's an awesome moment in the book where Jewel tells Kabanda that he is fighting him not as the behest of some kind of Khorne-crazed mania, but rather the wrath of the Emperor, and that he'll never give in to the bloodletting of Khorne. And I definitely argue that the red thirst is aggravated greatly by the presence of Kabanda, especially during Fear to Tread, the book we mentioned earlier. Kabanda wounds Sanguinius and sends a grip of blood angels into the thrors of the red thirst. And there's a theory that it's actually a curse born by Khorne, planted into the gene seed of Sanguinius when he was cast out into the void as an infant. But I'll be totally honest with you, I don't kind of believe that theory, because this has been present in the gene seed since Sanguinius joined the Blood Angels again. And the Blood Angels were created from a sample of Sanguinius before he left, before he was jettisoned into space. So again, take that one with a grain of salt as you will. But once a Blood Angel succumbs to the red thirst, they begin to degenerate into more and more of a beast. The Tower of the Lost is where they are put, just like their brothers that have fallen to the Black Rage. There, they fall into a deeper depravity. The tower is guarded by a force of 50 blood angels known as the Amarian Guard. Locked within the tower are all the victims of the twin curses of Sanguinius. But also, there is one individual that stalks the halls in black armor, the custodian of the damned, vowing to watch over his fallen brothers until the time comes to release them, or he is killed by the bestial rage of those within. The victims of the Red Thirst begin to grow far beyond the normal portions of a space marine, becoming engorged in muscle and no longer walking on two legs, using their arms to walk around in an ape-like stature. Their bodies have degenerated into beasts that resemble something between a Khorne bloodletter and a Warhammer Fantasy Vampire Count's Varghulf, twisted blood revenants that seek blood and warfare without end. Now, unlike the Black Rage, no one has ever recovered from the Red Thirst at this stage. You could argue that Centaur Jewel is probably the closest that you can get to this level of depravity before having to be restrained and interred within the tower. I mean, both of these curses manifest themselves different depending on the chapter. Chapters like the Flesh Terrors have a higher amount of Red Thirst victims, while other chapters are prone to raving illusions of the Black Rage. While these flaws mark the Blood Angels as tainted, I would argue that it gives them a measure of humility to their being. The haughtiness and the gall of the pre-heresy Emperor's children was always something that I found so foppish, and this is coming from someone who loves high elves. But when you look at the Blood Angels, there's a sort of reverence to their nobility. They understand that if they don't follow the many tenets, mantras, and means of controlling their caller that have been set out to them by the many Blood Angels before them, then they will fall victim to the whims of the Red Thirst. The Black Rage is also one of those unknown factors that no Blood Angel knows when it will overtake them. I mean, people around Astaroth the Grim remark how uncomfortable they are, as they can feel that, they at least know that his axe might find their neck one day. And I mean, uncomfortable for a space marine? That's gotta be a pretty fucking severe situation. The flaws of the Angel ultimately lead to a bloodline that was in a rampant decline up to the events of the rebirth of Guilliman and the rise of the Primaris Marines. Both curses were knocking out entire companies, if not chapters at a time. The 13th Black Crusade, coupled with the invasion of the High Fleet Leviathan on Baal, almost ensured the end of Sanguinius' legacy. While the Primaris are generally free from the genetic defects of their siblings' seeds, the Red Thirst is something that has always been there from the start. It's true that this is a curse, but I would argue that it makes up the character of the Scions of Sanguinius, and it helps to add to their noble countenance, the duality that they war with at the onset of every battle. Hopefully this gave you guys a really good idea on how the Blood Angels kind of work from, I guess, an internal standpoint, how their curse manifests itself. And we've talked a little bit about the Wolfen and the Connie's Helix, but this gives you a really good idea on how the Blood Angels are really different than all the other many angels of Space Marine chapters. But thank you so much for watching here today. If you have any questions on this, please go ahead and let me know below. Please, by all means, let me know if you notice something else, or there's another bit of lore that you want to talk about relating to the Black Rage and the Red Thirst. I'm more than happy to talk about it with you guys. But as always, thanks so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.